No? Oh, there we are. Great. Okay. Yeah, well, I feel like this has been such a blessing for me, too, to be able to come up here every few months and be with you guys and share from God's Word. We actually do have one person from Northern Iowa coming with us. So actually, the guy who's going to be leading our salt company, so the college ministry in Eugene, he's from Garner, so not too far from here. So we're going to have some North Iowa representation. Even if none of you come, we're still going to have some North Iowa representations. That's great. So this morning we're going to be looking at just one verse, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18. So if you want to follow along, you can go there. It's going to be on the screen too, just one verse. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, not because it's like one of the fun verses. You know, like we read just a second ago, Isaiah 41:10, like, fear not, for I'm with you. This is like the opposite of that. It's like you should be a little afraid. That's kind of the sense of Proverbs 16:18. But it's a good one for us to wrestle with. And so we're going to look at that together this morning. The Proverbs is really one of my favorite books as well. Over 800 Proverbs written mostly by King Solomon, a few other authors as well. And they're really not just a collection of like his favorite tweets, although it is kind of like that. There's actually a story happening in Proverbs. There's the story of the wise person, the evil person, and then kind of the person in the middle, the fool, the person who hasn't quite decided where their life is going to end up yet. And so we're going to be looking this morning about the topic of pride. Pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. That's the verse. And it's actually the center verse in the center chapter of the book of Proverbs. And I think that's interesting because in some ways this issue of pride and humility really is the central theme of the book of Proverbs. There's a lot of other things happening in Proverbs, but pride and humility is important if you want to understand the whole. But before we get into that, I want to share something with you that I've been learning through parenting. I've got 4 kids, 3, 4, 7, 8, and I'm learning a few things about how important it is to kind of understand the right order in relationships between things. Like, we kind of take that for granted, but as a kid, it's a little bit tougher. Like A comes before B. Got it. 1 comes before 2. I before E, except after C. Why does that have to be so hard? I still wrestle with that one. Monday comes before Tuesday. Winter comes before fool's spring, and then real spring. Yeah, that's right. Disobedience comes before discipline. Dinner comes before dessert. Unless it's been a hard day, then just switch it up. But I'm learning that it doesn't just stop with kids, too. It carries on into adolescence and adulthood. Candy leads to cavities. Coffee after 3 p.m. leads to insomnia. Eating too much causes my clothes to shrink somehow. Not putting oil in your car causes unexpected bills. Procrastination leads to anxiety. Overscheduling leads to stress. Unforgiveness leads to unhappiness. And so much of making it through this life in one piece is understanding the right order in relationships between things. A before B, 1 before 2, candy before cavities, and this. Pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It's one of the most important this before that relationships in all of Scripture. And this verse is actually one of those verses in the Bible that's not only quoted in the Bible, but even in pop culture. Maybe you've heard it before. It's in songs, it's in movies. Pride comes before destruction. So if it's so central in the book of Proverbs, and even so central in pop culture at large, I think it's worth our time to think, what does this verse mean? Because just as surely as A comes before B and winter before spring, so also pride comes before destruction. So if that's true, and it certainly is, we should ask 3 questions. What is pride? How does it destroy me? And then maybe most importantly, how can I destroy it before it destroys me? So that's where we're going to be going this morning. What is pride? How does it destroy me? And how can I destroy it before it destroys me? So let's first talk about pride. Like, what is it? So I don't have to know you to know that your biggest problem, your biggest miss, your biggest character flaw is pride. It's your biggest problem, worst enemy, greatest threat. It's actually not your stress or your regrets or your worry or your guilt, although those might be very real and probably related to pride somewhere. But your biggest problem, my biggest problem, when we woke up this morning is our pride. In other words, I got 99 problems and pride probably caused all of them. On a personal level, I can say that without a doubt and without competition, pride is the biggest problem in my marriage, my parenting, my job, my friendships, my finances, and most importantly, my walk with Jesus Christ, and the same is true for you. Pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And it's not just true on an individual level either. Like individually, each of us is wrestling with that, whether we know it or not. But also on a societal level, it's destroying us. I've learned a lot about our society over the last few years. Probably all of us have. But I have learned this, that racial pride, class pride, political pride, they're all still alive. And all still ugly and destructive. To elevate yourself over someone else on the basis of race, class, or political partisanship is an abomination to God. So pride isn't just my biggest problem, it's our biggest problem. Pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And I want to clarify something before we go further. Like there is a good kind of pride. There is a good kind of pride and a bad kind. There's the good kind of pride where I'm proud of my daughter for learning how to ride a bike. Or you're proud when you finally pass your exam and graduate. Or we're proud of our favorite football team when they finally get a new quarterback. Let's just let that one be. And even in the Bible, sometimes pride is spoken of as a positive thing. The Apostle Paul often spoke of, with pride, of his church plants, the ones that he had been part of. It's like he's so thankful and proud that they're growing and maturing and expanding. So there is a good kind of pride, but that's not the kind of pride we're talking about here in Proverbs 16:18. That's the bad kind of pride that we're going to be talking about today. So here's a simple definition of the bad kind of pride. It's really simple: thinking too highly of yourself. That's really what it is. At its root, thinking too highly of yourself. Very simple, very destructive. And that one error is the gasoline that fuels 1,000 tragedies in our hearts, in our lives, in our families, our churches, our relationships, and in our society. Just simply thinking too highly of ourselves. We put ourselves in a higher category than other humanity, and it offends God, it hurts people, and it destroys us. Pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. A couple summers ago, I got myself a new phone. It had been about 5 years. I think I had an iPhone 6 or 7, and I was trying to get the 12. And although I think they're coming out with like 15 this year, so who knows, I might have to get another one. But I realized they had different kinds of phones than when I had bought it back in 2011 or 2012, whatever it was. They had the iPhone Pro, and then the iPhone Pro Max. It's kind of different levels of different features, different value, and the price reflected that. Now, what I'm saying is that that's a totally fine way to categorize phones. In fact, that's helpful. Like, oh, this one has more stuff than that one. This one's better than that one. The problem, though, is that some of us don't just stop doing that with our phones. We kind of do that with people. Plain, Pro Max. And often we self-identify in the latter. And that's a problem. That's evil, because when we categorize ourselves as Pro Max and someone else as plain, we insult them and we insult their maker who made them in his image. When we categorize people, we contradict God. So don't misunderstand here. It's okay to know that you're good at something. In fact, I hope that you know the things that you're good at, the things that God has gifted you with. What is wrong is when we elevate our human worth over someone else because we're good at something. That is pride. That's the bad pride. That's the stuff God does not like. There's actually a well-known book written about 20 years ago, and it opens with this line. It says, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself
less. Now, before you write that down, that sounds nice, and there's some truth to it. But actually, if pride really is thinking too highly of ourselves, then maybe there actually is a place to think a little less of ourselves, to right-size our self-view, to see ourselves the way that God sees us. One of the ways that I've been talking about this with college students over the last 12 years, I've been a college pastor for about 12 years, is there's this thing I say on repeat. I say, you matter, but you're not the point. You matter, but you're not the point. And both parts of that equation are important. And today we're mostly talking about the second part. You're not the point. But maybe, before we dive into all that, maybe some of you this morning need to hear that you matter. That your dignity and value before God, no matter your skill set, your social status, spiritual maturity, income level, body type, like no matter any of that stuff, that you matter to God, that your life matters to God, that your life and your soul is precious to God. You matter. My guess is some of us need the other side of it this morning, so we're going to go there. But you're not the point. But pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Maybe some of us actually do need to think a little less of ourselves. This may be my favorite way to think about pride. I've heard it described this way. It says that pride is primarily an authorship error. That we put our name in the from line, and our name should actually be in the to line. So we call an achievement what is actually a gift. In so many ways, that's where we go wrong with pride. And one of the reasons that pride is so deadly and is so destructive is because it actually gives birth to other sins. It's not just one of many sins. It's some old authors have called this the great granddaddy of all sins. And I resonate with that because I used to call my granddad granddaddy. And he had 5 kids and 15 grandkids and 25 great-grandkids at the time that he passed. Lots of offspring. Pride's like that. Pride has 5 kids and 15 grandkids and 25 great-grandkids. That's why pride is listed first in the list of the 7 deadly sins, if you've heard of those before. Pride's first. Pride. Then greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. It's listed first because it's the granddaddy. It gives birth to all of those. Every sin you can think of has pride somewhere in its family tree. Author Tim Keller says the same idea like this. He's like, pride isn't just a spiritual disease. Actually, pride is the petri dish from which all other spiritual diseases come. Pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. But what kind of destruction are we talking about here? That's what I want to take a few minutes to talk through. What kind of destruction are we talking about? Are we talking about like my house is going to crumble? Like my body is going to decompose? My car is going to break down? My phone, my Pro Max phone is going to stop working? Like my money is going to disappear? What kind of destruction are we talking about? I would say no, it's none of those things. It's actually much worse than all of those things. So I want to share with you 4 things that pride destroys. There are more than 4, but here are 4 that we should wrestle with. 4 casualties of unchecked pride, and all of them are precious to you and precious to God. 4 things that pride destroys. Here's the first thing. Pride destroys your mind. Proverbs 15:12 says it like this. It says, a scoffer does not like to be reproved, and he will not listen to the wise. Foolish people don't like being wrong. Actually, Proverbs 9:8 says it even stronger. It says, don't reprove a fool, or he will hate you. So it's not just that he hates what you said, he hates you. Pride destroys your mind because you become completely unteachable. I mean, think about what it means to learn something. To be someone who learns, that means you have to go from not knowing to knowing. It has to be wrong to unwrong. Like, that's how you learn. But if you have pride, you can't do that. You can't admit that. And so a proud person has a lifetime of missed opportunities to learn and grow. Why? Because they can't admit to be wrong. That's how pride destroys your mind. Because you're blinded to all the places where you could and should grow. But your pride blinds you and it destroys your mind because you can't learn. Now let me do a little test here. This might be a little painful. Probably not something that a guest speaker should do. But right now, I'm on page 5 of my notes, and some of you have only been thinking about other people the whole time. I told you it would hurt a little. Now, we got to at least admit it takes a certain level of pride to get this far into a message on pride, primarily thinking about someone else's pride, right? Like it lives in us. So the challenge for all of us is don't just think, oh yeah, I know people like that. Just for a few minutes, remember I am people like that. I am like that. See, one of the terrible things about pride is that it actually blinds us to our own pride. So we can't learn, we can't grow, and so it destroys our mind. I've found that those who tend to worry about pride the most struggle with it the least. And those who struggle with it the least actually have the biggest problem with it. They are on the verge of destruction because pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So that's the first thing that pride destroys. Pride destroys your mind because you can't learn stuff. It blinds you, robs you, it makes you unteachable. Here's the second thing that pride destroys. Pride destroys your relationships. And that's important because to remember that pride isn't just about you and your mind. Pride's also about you and the people around you. Pride destroys your relationships. Think about just a few examples from the Bible. Pride destroyed Adam's relationship not only with God and with the ground, but actually with Eve. At the end of chapter 2, he's like writing love poems to her. 10 verses later, he's blaming her for the fall of humankind. That's a pretty big switch. That's a big fall. That's what pride does. Next chapter, pride literally destroyed Cain's relationship with his best friend and only brother, Abel, because he basically lost a worship contest, and he couldn't stand to be in second place. In one act of disobedience, pride destroyed every one of King David's critical relationships. His wife, his kids, his commander, his God. Pride destroys relationships, even the people you love most. Actually, especially the ones you love most. I've heard it said that the 3 most important ingredients of a healthy relationship is your ability to say these 3 things. Thank you, I'm sorry, I forgive you. Married people said amen. Really simple. Just happiness in life, just learn how to do those 3 things. They're really hard though. They're really hard because they contradict our pride, which is really strong. 3 things that really don't come naturally to any of us, especially when we're proud. Let's just look at each of those. Thank you. Thank you. Proud people are entitled people. I mean, at the root, that's what they are. That when good things happen to them, it's more like a wage than a gift. It's like, I earned that. Like when you work really hard and then you get a paycheck, you don't necessarily have to say thank you. It's like, well, I earned that. Well, proud people see their whole life kind of like that. Everything is earned. Everything is mine. Nothing is a gift. Therefore, there's no gratitude. No reason to say thank you. Pride doesn't say thank you, and that's one of the ways it destroys relationships. Pride also doesn't say I'm sorry. That's similar to how it destroys your mind. It's just so hard for a proud person to be wrong and to say I messed this up. You see, proud people own 1,000 microscopes and 0 mirrors. Really good at seeing everything wrong with everybody else. But the mirror, it's almost like they don't have one. So pride makes them never say, I'm sorry. It's so hard for a proud person to say, I was wrong. I messed up. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. If you can't remember the last time that you said one of those phrases, you're either perfect or you're proud. And perfect's not an option. So those would be the kind of phrases that would be good to just get fluent at. I was wrong, I messed up, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Pride doesn't apologize, but humility does. And then the third one, remember, thank you, I'm sorry, I forgive you. It's so hard for a proud person to say, I forgive you too. Because there's part of them that seems to feel like, I'm better than you, therefore I would never do what you did to me, therefore I can't sympathize with you, therefore I can't forgive you. Because you did something to me I could never do to you. That's what pride does. So pride not only doesn't say, I'm sorry, it also never says, I forgive you. Because deep down, they kind of think they could never do what you did to them. So pride doesn't forgive. So pride, it destroys a lot, but it destroys relationships for those three foundations, because it can't say, thank you, I'm sorry, and I forgive you. So to recap where we're at, pride destroys your mind, pride destroys your relationships, and then third, pride destroys your witness. Here's what I mean by this. This is important. Did you know that the biggest contradiction in Christianity to the watching world is actually not the struggling sinner who just kind of keeps failing, but actually the biggest contradiction is the self-righteous Pharisee, the person who thinks and acts like God only had to use a little bit of grace to save them. That's what the watching world finds most ugly. And so another way you could say that is the worst moment for the church of Jesus is not when the world sees our weakness, but it's when they see our pride. When we kind of subtly give off the vibe that we're pro-max. Y'all are playing, we're pro-max. That's the darkest moment for the church, the pride. To sing on Sunday that we're saved by grace and to act on Monday like we did this, we made this, we earned this, we built this. There is no pride quite like religious pride. Just like there's no villain quite like the Pharisee. I once heard one Christian say to another Christian, he said, you're kind of like a porcupine. You got a lot of good points, but nobody wants to be around you. Like, ouch, you know? So church, if you did something great for Jesus last week, that's great. Like, I honor you for that. But I want you to remember something, that you did it with oxygen you didn't make, in a world you didn't build, using a brain you can't even fully understand, for a king who didn't need you. Just remember that. And be humble. Or else pride will destroy your witness. So don't be a porcupine. Be humble. Pride destroys your mind. Pride destroys your relationships. Pride destroys your witness. And number 4, lastly, worst of all, most costly to you, pride destroys your soul. Why do I say that? I say pride will destroy your soul because pride, it's the most likely thing to keep you from the most important thing. The most important thing in the universe is the grace of God in Jesus Christ. The most important thing. So what's the main culprit of keeping you from that? What is the one thing that could possibly keep you from that? Well, the pride of heart. A too high view of yourself. James 4 says it like this, says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Just stop, like, have you ever thought about what it means for God? Like, God to oppose you. Like, God versus you. That's not a fair match. Actually, in Proverbs 16, a few verses earlier, it says, everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. So if deep in your heart you kind of subtly believe that you don't really need God, you will pay for that. Pride isn't just destructive, it's also punishable. That's what that verse means. It's heavy. So if you're full of pride this morning, full of arrogance, if you feel that, I just want to say with all due respect, again, this is the thing that guest preachers shouldn't say, but I just want you to know that honestly, your destroyed mind and your destroyed relationships and your destroyed witness, those all pale in comparison to this. Like your biggest problem is that pride is destroying your soul, and you are quite possibly walking into an eternity without God. That's how serious pride is. So if pride is killing us, if it is destroying us, how do we kill it first? How do we destroy it before it destroys us? In my experience, there's really only two ways to kill pride. Two ways to destroy pride. There's a hard way and an easy way. Let's start with the hard way. Here's the hard way to destroy pride. Something precious in your life is going to get destroyed, and you have to watch it happen. That's one way. The hard way to learn humility is something precious to you and precious to God is destroyed in front of your eyes, and it's your fault. Your pride destroys your mind or your family or your finances or your friendships or your future or your dreams or aspirations or your reputation. Something precious is destroyed, and that is one way to be humbled. Charles Spurgeon, famous British preacher, he used to say that every Christian has a choice between being humble or being humbled. How does God turn hard soil into soft soil? He sends a storm. So that was Moses' story too. 40 years thinking he was somebody. Another 40 years learning that he was actually nobody. And then 40 years discovering what God can do with a nobody. So Proverbs teaches us that in the place, like when you're in that place of destruction, when something bad has happened to you and you can't help but sense that was my fault, you can learn. You can be humbled in that place. It's not automatic. You can actually choose to just harden yourself instead, but you can also turn that into a learning moment, an opportunity to be humbled. So those are your options with it. You can either stay stubborn and just kind of watch reruns of your life, self-destructing for the rest of your days. I don't recommend it. I recommend looking at whatever is painful now happening to you because of your pride and saying, man, God, please help me. To actually humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and we learn in 1 Peter that he will then lift us up. It's your move. Your move. So that's the hard way to learn humility. That is the hard way. Destruction. It's painful, it's humiliating, but it is one way to learn humility. But here's the easier way. Here's the slightly easier way. Now everybody's listening up. Like, I want this way. Yeah, you do. This is going to sound like the most basic, simplistic, like cliche Christian thing I can say. But it is the only way to kill pride before it kills you, and that is this, to think about Jesus. To think about Jesus. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who was another British preacher, he was asked how to be humble, and here's how he answered, and I can't say it better, so I'm just going to read his words. He says, I have no method or technique. I can't tell you to get down on your knees and believe in prayer because then I know you'll be proud of that too. There's only one way to be humble, and that is this, to look into the face of Jesus Christ. You cannot be anything else when you see him. When you look at him, you realize who he is, who you are, what he has done for you, and then you are humbled. So in other words, you think about the King of Heaven with angels surrounding his throne and deciding to become a baby in a pig trough with diapers on. You think about the Creator God, the one who made every galaxy and every star, hanging on the cross like a criminal, crucified for you and me. You think about that. You think about the sights and the sounds of evil that were present on that day, on that good/bad Friday. You think about the God of all blessing came to earth to bless, being cursed, verbally and otherwise, on the cross. You think about the blood of God hitting the dirt in Jerusalem. You think about the sky going dark because the light of the world was dying for us. Think about the earth shaking, the temple curtain being torn in two, so that sinful and prideful people could walk into the presence of a holy and humble God. Like, you think about those things. You get yourself mentally to the foot of the cross, and it's really hard in that place to think, well, I'm kind of pretty awesome. And you're kneeling at the foot of the cross. It's hard to think, I'm pretty cool, pretty much righteous, pretty much okay. No, that's not what you think. When you think of Jesus, you're humbled. And so the path to pride killing is this. Every day, for the rest of your life, think about Jesus. Don't skip a day of not thinking about Jesus. And it's not enough to just believe in some vague notion of God or a higher power. That's not humbling enough. Believing in a higher power won't kill your pride. You have to think about Jesus for that. And so my point today, I hope I'm making this clear. My point today is not to say, be more humble. That's like telling a crying child to stop crying. You ever tried that? Oh yeah, we all have. How does that go? Generally not good. Generally not very good. Usually it actually escalates the problem. Stop crying. Well, they can't. Why? You haven't dealt with the actual cause. You haven't dealt with the root issue. You have to address that first, and then they'll stop. That's kind of how pride is. We need to find the cause, find the solution, and the solution is always Jesus. He's the solution. To look at him, to think of him. You know, the cross, in this weird moment in time, the cross is actually a reversal in so many ways. It's like the opposite of what we thought in so many ways. So the cross is actually a reversal of Proverbs 16:18. Pride comes before destruction. Yeah, that's true. Except for the one time it wasn't true. Except for the one time when humility, when ultimate humility came before destruction in the life of Jesus. He experienced the absolute reversal of Proverbs 16:18. Why? So that we could experience the reversal of destruction. In his death, he took the destruction we deserved, but in his resurrection, he made a way for us to rise up again. One of my favorite songs over the last few years is that song called Resurrecting. By your Spirit, I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. That's not just true when Jesus comes back someday. It's true then too. But it's true today. It's true right now. Like right now, you can look at the rubble in your life. The mess that your pride has caused. All the things that pride has destroyed. You can look at that and you can sing, yeah, but the resurrected King is resurrecting me. The resurrected King is strong, he's powerful, he's merciful, and he's creative. Creative enough to pick up all the mess, all the rubble, and turn it into a beautiful house of grace in your life. The resurrected King is resurrecting us. He will someday resurrect us in glory, but even now, he begins his resurrecting work to make beautiful what is not. And so the beauty of the gospel isn't just that your sins are forgiven and you're going to heaven. That is beautiful. But also the beauty of the gospel is this, that even though your pride caused destruction in your life and in the lives of others, that doesn't have to be the end of the story when Jesus is part of the story. I am not the pro max. Neither are you. We are people made in God's image, meant to love and worship him. So I want to close this morning with just a short story of, it's a story in the Bible, 1 Samuel. And it's the chapter right after David and Goliath. So David and Goliath is 1 Samuel 17. The chapter right after that, we kind of don't always read it in our Bible reading plans, but it's there and it's important. There's this moment where David, he's kind of the rising star. You know, he's winning the battles. People are singing songs to him. And you see two responses to this rising star named King David. And the responses are by a father and son, King Saul and Jonathan. And Saul responds poorly. He responds with pride. And so the rest of 1 and 2 Samuel is really just the chronicles of the destruction of Saul's mind and his relationships and his witness and his soul. But we see there's another option. That's not the only option. It's never the only option. The other option is Jonathan, the son of Saul, the friend of David. And after And remember who he was. He had the most to lose in this situation. He was the next up king, supposed to be. But Jonathan goes to David and offers his support verbally, and then he gives away his robe and his sword and his bow and his belt in this beautiful act of humility, because he chose to see David as a brother, not a rival, as a friend, not an enemy. There's more I could say about that story, but my prayer this morning is that God would use a broken man like me and a broken sermon like this to change the way you see yourself, to change the way you see the people around you, and most importantly, to change the way you see God. That we would be a little more humble, actually a lot more humble this morning when we remember that pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So as the band comes up, I want to just close us in prayer and ask God for kind of a spirit of Jonathan to fall on us, that we would become a little more like Jonathan, have that attitude of humility as we go about our day today and go about our week this week. So would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, as always, you're the most extraordinary person in the room. You had every reason to be proud, and yet you were humble. And oddly, we have every reason to be humble, but we're still proud. And so forgive us for that. Today we ask you to destroy our pride before it destroys us. So we do pray for humility and a heart and an attitude and a spirit like Jonathan to fall on us, to fill us up. Not so that we could get glory by being so humble, but so that you would get glory in our lives. That when people think of this church, it would basically be synonymous with humility. That when they think of Harvest, they would think of Jesus first and humility next. So we ask that you would do these things in your name, do it for your glory. We need you, we love you, we look to you, and we think about you, and we worship you now.